for Latin American Studies. We are very happy to have here Professor Oscar Mazzoleni. He's a professor of political science and the director of the Research Observatory for Regional Research at the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. His main research interests include party politics, regionalism, nationalism, and populism. He has been a visiting professor in several places, like the University of Geneva, Paris Sorbonne, Columbia. He has published in several peer-reviewed journals. He is the co-editor of Political Populism, a handbook, and he has three recent comparative books. Let me mention the last one that is forthcoming in Routledge in 2019, The People and the Nation, Populism and Ethno-Territories Politics in Europe. We are co-authors of one article, and we're going to work on a book now, so I am very grateful to have Mazzoleni here with us. Thank you, and thanks for attending this.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation by the University of Florida, the different centers, and especially the invitation of Carlos de la Torre. And the topic today is mentioned in the title, Right-Wing Populism and Borders Towards a Global Perspective. Again, populism. Almost everybody talk today on populism everywhere in Europe, in the US, and Latin America. Populism is a growing industry in political social sciences, of course, as you know, as probably know, everybody know it here. And I think many scholars consider that from conceptually and theoretical point of view, almost all is done in populist studies. However, populism is a very tricky notion. It's a widespread, multifaceted, polymorphous, cross-national, cross-continental phenomenon, erasing in current democracy and in a globalized world. Therefore, new frames of analysis might be useful and necessary. This, at least from my point of view. One of these possible way to develop other alternative and complementary ways to grasp populist phenomenon is to take in consideration borders. Borders are first of all state borders. And state borders are traditionally understood as demarcations amongst states characterized by established geographic lines of division, of course. However, many scholars in recent years in sociology, in political science, geography, have suggested that state borders now take more differentiated, selective, contradictory forms. On the one side, you have more transparent borders, and we talk about borderless world, especially for transnational firms. This is not the case for a lot of groups, a lot of people belonging to some citizenship, of course. There are some contradictory trends. Even if national territories remain bounded by traditional borderlines, globalization is causing and favoring novel types of boundary between peoples and countries. This is a very huge new issue in many of these disciplines, sociology, political science, geography, but usually not connected with populism. So the main question is exactly this: how you can connect populism and border, especially when right-wing populism is at stake. This is my question today. And try to address this question, I suggest, this is my thesis, that in reality border plays a crucial role in populism, a very crucial role in populism, from three different and complementary perspectives. One is the border as a logic. So my opinion is that populism, one of the core feature, or the main core feature of populism, are exactly borders, opposing bounded entities. This is a logic, an underlying logic in populist discourse, rhetoric. A second perspective is borders as an issue. an issue-related dimension connected with the, of course, framing some bordering controversies. Later we can see, of course, the war, everywhere the war, of course, but this is an issue, political issue, connected with strategies by parties and leaders. But also, borders can be considered as an opportunity, political condition favoring the emergence and success of populist mobilization. Of course, connected with globalization and how globalization shape new borders and transform all borders. So, go ahead in this first perspective that I mentioned. So, in which sense exactly we can say that border is an underlying logic of populism? Of course, populism is a contentious notion. There are plenty of definitions of populism, style, discourse, ideology, and so on, so on. However, I think a crucial underlying feature of this notion is the relevance of bordering logic. Populism is a border-making discourse. Rhetoric and claim is a border-making discourse. Is a way by which we observe the construction of bounding entities. And this is almost in all definition of populism. Because this definition considers in a Manichaean, oppositional, antagonistic way, people versus elite, people versus non-elite, us versus them. So in this sense, populism expresses an attempt to create or redraw borders between groups, cleavages, territories. And if you look at the old but very important book, a classical book by Margaret Canavan, the title of this book is Populism, and Canavan said, the populists are those who wish to challenge existing boundaries and to redraw the lines of battle in a new place. That's an expression by, a sentence by Canavan. We can also have an example, larger example, by Canavan also defined populism in other places, in other publication, and is connected also with another definition by Manny Sorel to French-speaking political scientist. And the definition is populism as narrative, arguing that the true people and its sovereignty has been betrayed by the elite and others, and the radical change is needed for restoring people's sovereignty. Therefore, the people is conceived by and throughout the opposition to the elite and the others. So the definition itself of the people cannot work without the opposition, and so the border is necessary for the meaning itself of the people. So the border demarcation is a normative way or normative strategy to define good and bad in society and politics. Move on the borders as issue. So the second perspective. So to some extent, bordering issues can arise as, of course, can be seen as a relevant argument in populist party on leader discourse. Everywhere, not only in the US, in Europe, but on other continents, of course. So territorially rooted and bounded entities are mainly adopting right-wing version of populist agenda, right-wing versions. Right-wing populism claim for rebordering policies against migrant flows, criminals, external economic threat, as well as against supranational and multilateral powers in order to protect national interests. So, of course, in this sense, bordering issues tend to be proxies of nationalist claims. And we have many examples, of course. You know better than me. But I've tried to do a small analysis on the tweet by the US president. And it was in 2 months, the most frequent use of the word is the border. So that's also interesting. So not the border, not the borders necessarily, the border, that border. The border is much more considered in the discourse, in the tweets, than the rest of the notion used by the US president. So it's 2 months analysis on tweets. Let's show the relevance of this issue, of course. But the issue, of course, is not so question of US, it's question also Latin America, and also in connection also with the relevance of new trends in US. You have plenty of reactions, as the reaction by Bolsonaro, supporting the decision by the US president to reinforce the border between Mexico and US in connection with the current immigration policy, and of course the question of the border, also the underlying question of the border, raised also when Bolsonaro spoke on Amazon, because the question of sovereignty and of course the borders are completely interconnected. So that's I think it's very relevant again. And if you move on the other side of Atlantic, and we go to UK, that's it. Of course, the Brexit campaign is based on border control, and this is one of the well-known flyer slogan by Brexiteers. And we must break free of the EU and take back control of our borders. Of course, that's a relevant issue, and of course, the scholars usually frame this issue as a question of immigration. But I think, from a perspective of populist scholars, we have also to consider that it's not simply a question of immigration, but borders. And borders are a multifaceted dimension in this sense. They create the borders not only for immigration, are for financial flows, for control of market, protectionism, and so on. That's not connected on immigration issue. And of course, from the western to the eastern part of Europe, we have also plenty of other examples, as the case of Orban's border between Hungary and Serbia, which is also a very relevant issue there for several months in the last years. So that's of course a question as a border maintenance policy, in this sense, is a very relevant issue, intimately linked to the national identity and to national distinctiveness. And the lack of the borders, from the perspective of right-wing populists, their weakness represented as a threat for the two people, their interest and their identity, and the strategy to regain control over own borders, bracket, is a way to reconquest the past sovereignty, the sovereignty, and prosperity, and so on. That's the border, the relevance of the border. But we can also move on the third perspective now, and looking at this aspect of condition of possibility for populist parties, especially right-wing populist party, to exploit the situation molded, embedded, transformed by globalization in connection with borders and state borders. So globalization is provoking a transition from one general and strict fixed border line to multiple lines. Globalization reduces the impermeability of external borders and increased flow of people. That's it. And this is also connected with the opposition between cosmopolitanism and nativism. On the one hand, globalization seems to shape a borderless world. On the other hand, rebordering trends has been ongoing since 2 decades, more or less. And this is also a tension between market interest, market flow, and security. So borders decline, blurring lines, and new borders shape social opportunities for people, of course, but also create inequalities, uncertainties among groups and individuals. And these aspects, these dimensions, are, in this sense, opportunities for populist actors, which can take advantage of a rebordering frame, presenting borders as symbols of a stable, protected, people-oriented society against those who threaten, of course, people's will. Right-wing populist actors try to gain a relevant political role in redrawing borders, in this sense, between the Serbian people and the deserving elites and immigrants, but also in claiming for defending prosperity, dignity, sovereignty of our country against of the rest of the world. That's of the relevance, in this sense, of the borders is connected with other configuration of notion, all connected with populism. Sovereignty especially, of course, and the opposition between people, the serving people and the serving elites and the immigrants. And that's of course, my conclusion. Again, the notion of borders, in this perspective, or connected with three perspectives, is crucial for understanding contemporary populism as a multifaceted phenomenon. And this linkage can be interpreted in different ways. As I said, border making can be seen as an intrinsic logic of populism. Borders can embody specific issues, but also borders and the transformation of border landscapes shaped by global trends might create political opportunity for successful political parties with populist claims, of course, leaders. And of course, it is also important to say that this perspective needs to be considered in the context, considering the diversity of actors and context. And what I would like to underline, of course, depending on the context, the border issues can be more or less relevant. Depending on the context, the question of the border as an opportunity, for right-wing populist parties can be relevant or less. I think for mobilizing in New York for the next U.S. election, ongoing next election is different than mobilizing in Texas or somewhere else. I think that's of course important. And in order to draw a global approach in understanding populist phenomenon from also this bordering perspectives, it is necessary to build a comparative analysis, of course, showing how border logics, issues, and opportunities arise and link each other. That's, of course, the point. So, in this sense, my short presentation is as a goal to present a new way to grasp populist phenomenon and to open the question and to open the discussion. Thank you very much.